Now, I am pleased to introduce our speakers for this evening, and I only have a headshot for one of our speakers, but we actually have two speakers joining us this evening. Our first speaker is Dan Fillius, and Dan is the statewide field specialist for commercial vegetables and specialty crops with Iowa State University Extension and Outreach. Before joining Extension, Dan grew organic vegetables for 13 years, including stints managing the Michigan State University Student Organic Farm and 140 acres of vegetables at Featherstone Farm. We are also joined by Dave Nelson. Dave and his wife are co-owners of Rooted Resplendence Farm in Elkhart, Iowa. They purchased the land in 2023 and turned a field of traditional row crops into a cut flower farm and homestead. So we are happy to have the expertise of both of these wonderful speakers here with us this evening. I will let them take over, and I will see everyone at the end for our question and answer section.
So I'm Dan. I at one of those farms that I managed in the past at Michigan State Student Organic Farm. We had one field that was cut flowers, and we sold. We had a flower CSA there, so I did do a bit of cut flower production. But my job was never the arranging. I still am working today to really perfect the arrangements. I feel fairly good at growing the flowers, but arranging them is really where it comes all together, and where you can make or break, the sales. It seems like, if you are a farmer florist, that is. Plenty of people grow flowers and sell them without arranging them. But let's get started here. So I'm Dan. I work. If you are a commercial grower, if you are selling vegetables, flowers, any specialty crop like that, then you can work with me and get technical assistance by texting me pictures of problems. And if I can't figure that out, I can come visit you. I do have a Instagram account where I try to share things that I see on farms, whether they're great ideas that farmers have had for solving problems, or if I see a disease on a plant, I want to let people know right away. So you can give me a follow there. I do have a couple podcasts. One is about the weather. This is really Iowa centric. So we look at Iowa weather and specialty crops impacts each week during the growing season. And then Pivot Points is a new one I do. It's about big changes that farmers have made, transitions on their farms. And if you're interested in hearing those stories, then there's that. Speak at things like this and do some research. And you're not here to hear about that. So let's talk about flowers. Starting from seed at the very beginning. A lot of people are starting indoors, and there's a couple options. We can start crops indoors, or we can sow them directly out in the field. This is when we're starting from seed, that is. And not everything works well for both. So let's look at which ones might prefer that. Some crops that prefer to be started indoors are things like snapdragon, feverfew, campanula, dianthus, Iceland poppy. I've got a question mark here. It's an either or, and I've had luck with both. I had really good luck this past fall with seeding it directly out in the field and having it germinate. But in general, starting indoors, and you can get earlier yields for some crops by planting out a multi-week old plant rather than just a seed. And also, they come up better. You can get more reliable germination by babying them, keeping them the right moisture, giving them the right light, and then you can save on seed that way potentially. And when you plant them out, if you're looking to get 5 inches apart or 6 inches apart or however far apart, if you're planting transplants at that spacing, then you don't have to worry about plants being too close together for, say, a hoe to fit, or plants being too close together and competing with each other. Transplanting is perfect for ideal spacing. This is probably review for most of you, though. I will say, on this note of better germination percentage is what I've found as a vegetable producer primarily, is that percentage germination is generally lower than I find in some vegetables. So when I'm making my calculations for the coming year, I tend to always count on getting twice as much seed as plants that I want, because I'm seeding 2 or so seeds per cell. If I sprinkle a third one in there, I don't worry about it. I just go 2 to 3, and then still, if I want, say, 10 plants, I might only get 7 cells that have plants in them, but I might get one cell that has 3 and I only want 1 or 2. So I will prick out that one at a very small, maybe one true leaf, and put it into one of those empty cells. Any multiples, I'll do that. But generally, I'm not worried too much about whether there's 2 plants in there. I worry more about that for things like head lettuce, vegetables, that is, where I'd want just one of those things. They could get deformed if they are together. And as far as covering seeds, when you're putting them into those cells, larger seeds, you would typically want to make a deeper dibble and cover them. Some seeds will say sow on the surface. They need light in order to germinate. However, when leaving seeds on the surface in a transplant tray and watering them, those seeds can get washed out. So I typically cover those with vermiculite, which like a light layer, and that will keep them more protected from getting washed out. Stretching can be a problem when starting indoors. Not everybody has, I'll go back to this last picture. Not everybody has the lights like this. And if you are starting plants right next to just a window, you can end up with stretched stems like this. And stretched stems like this can be a bad thing. Could lead to top heaviness. You want to avoid it because these plants are weak and they generally need more light than a window can provide. So this person's doing both a window and a grow light. You don't need to necessarily do both. I think a grow light is generally enough. And uh, T5 lights are better than T8 lights, which are better than T12 lights. And those are generally like the diameter of the fluorescent tube and getting smaller. T5s are the smallest diameter. T12s are the big shop lights. However, over the last 10 years, really LED has just dominated. So the fluorescent like terminology is kind of outdated. But in general, you want to have lights close to plants at the very beginning when you're first seeding the seeds so that when they come up, they are not stretching right away. You want to have a nice stocky plant that is stout. All right, that's transplanting. Let's talk about direct seeding because it's easy, it's simple, and thankfully, some plants prefer it, like zinnias and sunflowers, bupleurum, larkspur, nigella are the ones I've got written down there. And you get better germination for some because of the natural processes, such as vernalization. If you get seeds that are out there, I see this a lot in my in the flowers that I neglected to harvest that then set seed and drop their seeds in my garden. I'm amazed at how much better germination it is they have because they have spent time outdoors. They've gotten cold, and it's the next year, and they just come up so well. So there are some reasons why direct seeding is better. Um, and in other cases, it's better to just buy the transplants because some seeds are hard to germinate. Pictured here is Lisianthus. This is notoriously, it's a small, hard to germinate. It's a small seed. Maybe it's not hard to germinate. It just takes forever to get to looking like a plant like you see here. So it's sometimes just better to buy these in. And eucalyptus can also take a lot of time to get to grow to size. You can start these from seed. Eucalyptus is not as hard as Lisianthus necessarily, but still, sometimes it's worthwhile to just buy the transplants. And if you can find them at a local garden center, great. If not, sometimes there are places you can buy them online and get a whole tray of these transplants shipped to you. And I'll talk about those later. One second. Sorry, my daughter was telling me something over there. Other plant material that you can be planting, it's not all seeds, it's not all transplants. There are roots, there are corms, there are tubers, there are bulbs, and like that. We've got peonies on the left here. We've got tulips on the right here. This grower here is growing these tulips in hydroponic trays and forcing them under lights in a basement, actually. A lot of perennial flowers are done this way, and these are things that generally you're buying through the mail or at the garden center, but that give, whether it's flowers or woodies or things like that, these are things that are just plant material that are planted at various times of the year. So when is the best time? To let me take a drink here for a sec. So when you're sowing transplants, this is uh, starting them from seed indoors to plant out as a transplant, like these snapdragons here. For snapdragons, you want to go about 5 weeks early, and this is assuming they're in a pretty small cell. A 128 is what I use, which means 128 plants in a 10-inch by 20-inch tray. Um, that's if you're doing it in a bigger pot, you're going to want to do it a little bit earlier because you want them to fill their roots out so that when you pluck them out of the cell, they're fully rooted out. Um, so maybe 6 weeks if it's a 4 pack or something like that. But for me, snapdragons and feverfew, they take some cold, so you can seed them in the basement or under lights or wherever your light rack is, early to late March, so that you can plant that thing out in early to mid, sometime in April, basically. Mid-April is pretty good for snapdragons. Rudbeckia or black-eyed Susan, Craspedia, which is also known as sunball or drumstick flower. That's, I'd say, 5 to 6 weeks early. Excuse me. And that's late March to early April is when you'd plant those because these ones are a little bit less tender, or sorry, a little more tender, a little less cold hardy. And then Celosia and Gomphrena, really warm, loving crops. You want to do those about 6 weeks early and do those at the same time as those Rudbeckia and Craspedia, late March to early April. For direct seeding, sunflowers like it warm. Zinnias also. So you want to do that once the chance of frost has passed. Now, when I say early May to late July on this, I'm thinking that you are succession planting this. I'm planting sunflowers many times from early May through late July so that I always am having blooms because a lot of the ones I'm planting are single stems for cuts rather than a branching one that keeps blooming. So you've got a flush here and they're all done. And then you have to have another planting so that the next flush is ready when those ones are cut. Zinnias keep going. I do a couple plantings of those. Larkspur, Bupleurum, Nigella, all these things are cold hardy. Same with Dara. And I'll show a picture of what Dara is later. It's like a Queen Anne's lace, but decorative. Marigold is you'll see some recommendations to transplant marigold, and I find that it works. It can work fine to be direct seeded. But a lot of people like to transplant that because it needs a lot of space, and it does just fine being transplanted also. And planting in mid-June, it can be hot and dry at that time, and it can be difficult to keep direct seeded things wet at that point. But if you can do it, marigold, I've had great luck with direct seeding it and having it come up. Bachelor's button is one that does really well with vernalization, and you can plant that in the prior fall, and it can come up, and it's also very cold hardy, so you might have a great success with an early bloom by planting it the prior fall. Dahlias are pretty frost tender. These are things that you are digging up in the winter, holding, and then planting out near the when frost is close to out of the picture. Ranunculus, I know growers who are planting this in January, February in a high tunnel. Spring blooming bulbs or the prior fall, and if it's blooming in the summer as a bulb, you think, is it a frost tender one or not? And that follow the instructions specifically for those bulbs. So let's look at some reliable cultivars that work well here in Iowa. In general, when we're looking at cut flower properties, we want things that are long stems, good vase life, and colors that work. And what are colors that work? This is something that you get to pick. Do you like the bright pops of magenta, bright yellow, things like that? This is your color palette. What speaks to you? Some people prefer the muted palette, or like a lavender, or the browner shades of pink that are pretty commonly used in, say, wedding work these days. But generally, florists like longer stems so they can cut them and they don't end up with a flower that's too short in the vase that they're going to be using it in. You can always cut them shorter, but you can't cut them longer. So the longest you can get that stem, the better. Of course, this sunflower in this picture is way too long for a florist to use. You would never cut this thing that long down to the ground. Certainly not. But let's look at some ones. This picture, this is one of my favorite snapdragons pictured here, this Potomac orange. I couldn't find any pictures of my own that I'd taken of my Potomac orange. So this one is from the Johnny's Selected Seeds website. But something to know in Snapdragon, something to pay attention to is the group number. They're usually going to have a number next to their name, or some will even tell you the fully group number. But like Avignon Roman numeral 2, can Roman numeral 2 to 3. This is like group 2 to 3, group 3 to 4. And generally, group 1 are the ones that bloom earliest. And then group 4 is one of the later ones. So the group 3 to 4 are a summer one, group 1 would be a spring one. And a lot of times, group 1 to 2, this might be planted protected, in a protected place, like in a tunnel, so that they are blooming earlier. But they'll generally have shorter days between planting and blooming. How much shorter? It might only be a week earlier than group 3, a group 2, but it's still earlier. So Avignon used to be known as Costa, formerly known as Costa series. And when you see series, that just means these flowers are all the same general properties, but then they have different colors. So if within the Avignon series, you're going to see a white and an apricot color and all the different colors. And Potomac has orange and apple blossom. I love apple blossom. It's a white one with a little rose color, little light pink, I should say, at the mouth of that little kind of like if you imagine this orange, which is sort of a salmon color with an orange pop here. The apple blossom is all white with a little light pink pop at the mouth right there. That's those two are two of my favorites. I've seen Potomac dark orange also, and I've grown it, and I don't think it's any necessarily better than orange. It's a little darker, but I think that orange works for me a lot better with with the palette that I prefer. Feverfew, this is a really nice filler. It's got a very medicinal scent to it. The leaves do. It's very related to tansy, and I've seen in many catalogs the Magic series and Tetra White. These are two reliable ones. And then I was visiting a grower in eastern Iowa, and they had one that looked more like this one in the picture, and I just loved the little tiny perfect flowers that it had, and it was so much more robust than the I think the Tetra White that I was growing in my garden at the time. And they said, well, I just buy the quote unquote wild type, and this you should the wild type is not necessarily native to here, but it is one that has not been selected for improvement necessarily. So I just went and I found the quote unquote wild type, and this is the species and genus here, and I've had really good luck with it. It's been a nice one. I enjoy using this as a nice filler in bouquets. Rudbeckia, like Black-Eyed Susan. You've got Indian Summer is a really nice annual variety. Rudbeckia triloba is more of a perennial one that can survive the winter potentially here. These annual ones can reseed, and you might get a little start that like germinates the fall before and does survive the winter if it's covered by snow, say. But generally, they are only good for 1 year, these annual varieties. My favorite variety of all was Gloriosa Double Daisy, but it is no longer. I have not been able to find seed for that in the last couple of years. It was a double flowered one and some of them were even like more than double. It's just loaded with petals with the yellow petals around the black center. And I heard from the seed companies that it was not very stable, and so the breeder decided to not produce it anymore. But anyway, rest in peace, Gloriosa Double Daisy. Craspedia, if you were having a hard time imagining what I was talking about earlier when I was talking about Craspedia or drumstick flower, the main variety that I like from this one that I see the most is called Sunball. You've probably seen this flower quite a bit. Maybe you didn't know what it was called, but this one is really good for drying. It's a vigorous plant can make so many of these stems in a year, and more than I really can keep on top of. And so when I fall behind on them, I just go and clear cut it and hang them up upside down to dry. And they keep that yellow color really well when dry. Celosia is this one. It's all, if you know Amish coxcomb with that brain look to it, that is also another type of celosia. But these plume celosias are very much more common, I think, in floral work. So you've got shimmer, which is a sort of a muted that floral apricot color almost. The wedding work apricot color. Selway and Chief series are both common ones that are probably pictured in here. This one's probably a Selway right here. And flamingo feather is a soft pink that's pretty reliable one to grow. This one, if you don't, it's so prolific that I could never keep up with it with cutting back all the blooms. It would just keep giving and giving and giving. And this is generally true of a cut flower, is you cut one and it just keeps coming. And this one, if you don't keep it cut back, will self-seed. It'll go to seed and it'll really become pretty weedy. So I have a lot of, in my salad mix that I'm planting, rotating beds in my garden, I do end up with a fair bit of celosia that is just still out there and that I have to weed out. Gumfreen is a nice one, another one that might self-seed also if you don't keep on top of it, but it's a really good one for drying. So just like that drumstick flower, you can clear cut this, hang it to dry, and the color stays really well. This picture is Strawberry Fields right here. This is a nice reddish one. The QIS series and Audrey series are both really nice ones as well. Gumfreen is a really adorable one, and I just love this flower. Sunflowers, I mentioned, the single stem ones are used mostly for cutting, and those single stem ones are these series here. The Pro Cut series and the Sunrich series are the two main ones for single stem flowers. And the ones that I prefer, take it or leave it. There are dozens, it seems like, of these within the Pro Cut series for sure. But I like Gold Light DMR. DMR stands for Downy Mildew Resistance, and in a year where it is cold and wet when sunflowers are germinating, downy mildew can really wipe out a crop. And there's at least one grower I know who was growing acres of sunflowers for cuts one year, and it was a really damp year and when they were coming up, and he lost almost his entire crop to downy mildew. So having downy mildew resistance can make a big difference. That being said, in most years, it's not really a big problem here. But it is, like, say, in the Dakotas, where sunflower production, oilseed is a big industry up there. Downy mildew is one of the big bad ones that they are treating seeds to prevent infection by. So anyway, Gold Light DMR and Bicolor Pro Cut are really good ones. And I like Summer Provence in Sunrich. Zohar is a good one too. And then just because they're branching doesn't mean it's bad. Some of them have longer branches, so you can get a decent, stem on those cuts. And Starburst Greenburst is a fun one that is a downy mildew resistant one also. And Soraya is also another nice branching one. But sometimes, if when I'm making a bouquet, sometimes I don't really mind a short stem on a sunflower, because if I've got a vase, if I put a long stem sunflower in it, it's kind of top heavy and flops over. So I want a short one that's going to be just peeking out of the edge of the vase and be sort of a little spiller almost and a focal that's right there at the mouth of it. But again, like I said, I'm not an expert at arrangements, so don't take my word for it. Zinnias, the Bennery's Giant series are really nice. I don't know 100% if this is Salmon Rose in the picture, but Salmon Rose looks a lot like that one right there. Could be there's the Queenie series also has this sort of two-tone look, but they're more of a, I don't think this is Queenie. Queenie's has some nice orange and lime colors mixed together. And Agave is one that's bred by Johnny's, that's kind of a cactus flowered one that has some nice colors similar to what the pictured one is here. And then the Oklahoma series is a nice small one. Sometimes, Bennery's Giant are a nice big zinnia, but sometimes you want just a small little zinnia for an accent flower, and the Oklahoma series is a nice one for that. This is in my garden, some larkspur, mix of QIS series and misty lavender that I grew last year. This overwintered in a low tunnel. We may have time to talk a little bit about that today, but I may not. I may run myself right out of time. But I love larkspur. Bupleurum, green gold. This is it's an essential filler. It's a really good one, and it does best in cold. It's very hardy, so it can overwinter from the winter before and be there in your garden the next spring. It has a really nice airiness. It has a good vase life. It has adds such good structure, and the little pops of yellow that are in the flowers here are so nice. But it's a funny word, and here's the pronunciation guide for you: Bupleurum. Bupleurum. Nigella self seeds easily also, so beware with this one. But I love the blue. There's not many really blue flowers, but the Miss Jekyll's dark blue, as pictured here, is a really nice one. Delft blue is a different blue Nigella, and then there's other when these flowers mature, they become this weird little alien like egg pod thing. And there's ones that are both dark purple and green. And whether you can buy them separately. Black pod is the dark purple, green is the green pod. And some people use those pods in their arrangements. But if you let those pods stay too long in the garden, they will break open and scatter seeds, which if you're saving seed, maybe not a problem. Also, that's another opportunity if you can get out there and save these seeds. Here's Dara. I was telling you about this Queen Anne's lace. Dara is the variety name for this wild carrot. It's got these purple colors, and it's just such an essential one for if you're into this look. The umbels in your bouquets. Dara is a really popular, one of the most popular ones of these this type of flower. I love cocoa gold marigolds. I like making garlands like this in the fall, and I've got ones from the last 4 years, I think, hanging up on the dried, hanging up in our porch, but I just love making these garlands. It's a fun tradition in our family. Here's Bachelor's Button. This is Florist Blue Boy. There's Black Button, which is a purple one also. Great varieties. And I will talk about where to get these things in a slide coming up here. But before we do that, let's talk about some pests and diseases. Japanese bee Flowers have a lot of pests. Unfortunately, some of them more than others. Japanese beetles love basil, they love sunflowers, they love zinnias, and they love dahlias. Those, and I probably forgot a couple there, but they will just swarm these things. So these plants can work as trap crops for preventing them from getting on your other things potentially. Corn rootworm beetle. There are both striped ones and spotted ones, as pictured here. These striped ones on the left, these look a lot like cucumber beetles, but these are corn rootworm beetles here, and because of the large corn production in our landscape, there's a huge reservoir population. So you can really, you could wipe them out with some toxic chemicals by sprayed on your flowers, but new ones will come and get and take their place there. But they can damage blooms. They're not so much of a problem in, say, squash production, but they can cause like damage to blooms. And if you're selling flowers, the slightest little damage to make that thing look off, it can sometimes make a lot of buyers not really want it. So these are, in my experience from the last 5, 6 years here in Iowa, these seem to be one of the biggest problems for flower production here, corn rootworm beetles. There are other little things like thrips, as pictured here on this sweet pea. You can see little thrips in here. I hear a lot of people having issues with them in peonies. Those peonies are so many layers and they're just inside there. So people who sell peonies, sometimes florists find thrips crawling out of there. Aphids on foxglove can be an issue in the spring. And then leaf hoppers, any flower that is in the aster family. So things like China asters and feverfew, those ones are ones that I've seen them the worst on. There's a few others. Strawflower can be really bad hit by leaf hoppers if they transmit aster yellows to those flowers. And that's a hit and miss. It's not bad every year, but 2024 was a really bad year for that. So how do you keep these pests out? On a small scale, exclusion is a really good way to do this. This grower here, this is a snip from YouTube that I was watching a video of. This guy shows step by step how to make these like netting tunnels, which here he is inside one of them. You can see they overlap at the top right there, and then that makes them overlap at the end. So you can sort of like part them and walk into there to be inside. This is a good way to keep them off of a big planting. But if things, some dahlia growers and growers with bigger blooms will just use organza bags, and when that bloom is a bud, they'll just cover it then, and that'll exclude the pests from uh, chewing on those flowers. It works for bigger things, some, maybe sunflowers and dahlias and things like that. But a big planting of zinnias, it's impractical to use organza bags on those. So I asked a flower grower. Dave is also going to join us and answer some questions. But I asked a flower grower, Lacey Bell, like what are some things that you ask that people commonly ask you? So Lacey's down in Leon, Iowa, southern Iowa. This is a picture of her, one of her fields right here, and she was said that a lot of people ask her about weed control, and so she makes sure to manage weeds by the spacing that she uses, keeping it plants far apart enough that she can get a hose between them, or close enough together that they're shading weeds out. And then certain crops, she'll use weed fabric like this one, with plants planted in each hole, or using organic mulch on her around them instead of the plastic mulch. Irrigation, I should say in this last one, this is a good example of irrigation right here. It's a small sprinkler here that can water a good amount of area, and you can see there's one here. Then down here, there's another one. So they're spread out and they can sprinkler really well. Drip tape is another thing. You can use this vinyl header or a black poly header and get drip tape like stretched out there. That's good to keep blossoms dry, because if you're using a sprinkler all season long, it can damage blossoms. The blossoms don't really like getting wet. So sprinklers good for germinating young plants, but drip tape's better later on. And a new thing that's out now is the Sumi Sansui, which is from Japan. There's a couple distributors in America now, but it's like drip tape. Like we've got this drip tape going down here. Oops, I'm going to go back. This drip tape right here, but imagine it is like three or maybe six times as big in diameter, and it's got tiny perforations all along it, and it sprays a little stream along both sides. So you can end up with a big rectangle of wetness. It's sprinkler tape that's kind of like drip tape, but these are things that are out now. I talked about continuous supply with sunflowers earlier. I mentioned that I succession plant zinnias. I do that because they're really prone to powdery mildew, and having a couple of successions can help me keep them looking good. And I generally don't spray, but some people do. And then also think about what's going to be cut and come again, so that if you cut, it gives more. A lot of flowers are like that, but not every. And think also you can plant, if you have a number of different varieties that have different days to maturity, or say snapdragons with different group numbers. You can have early bloomers, mid bloomers, and late bloomers all from one planting date. So that is another way to have a continuous supply. Dave, tell us. I'm going to shut up, and I want to hear you. I want to hear what are some lessons you've learned? What are things I missed? Tell us what you've learned from starting your own flower farm in Elkhart.
Yeah, well, I would say the corn rootworm beetle is definitely something that you have to worry about. It's a little bit easier if you're in town; you don't have quite as much pressure. But we're out in the middle of other row crop fields. Last year they came and crop dusted, or 2 years ago they came and crop dusted, and within 48 hours, all of those rootworm beetles were just infesting everything. I had we succession plant about 2/3 of an acre of, I mean, we've got several acres of sunflowers, but we were succession planting about 2/3 of an acre at a time. And one of those successions, they pretty much just wiped it out. I mean, we could go out and when that sunflower was just still closed and just barely starting to show a few petals, I could hopefully get a couple of them. But even then, like I didn't know which colors they were sometimes, so I had to wait until they could open indoors. But I think the biggest thing is just thinking about scale. I mean, Jenny and I have done vegetable gardens and flower gardens at home, and been avid gardeners or master gardeners. But when you go to starting to want to sell your flowers, and you touched a little bit on this, just having that continuous supply. When you're doing it at home, even if you're giving flowers away, usually you've got more than you can possibly use in a given week. Even if you're trying to do two, three, four, five bouquets. But all of a sudden, when you're trying to do 20, 30 bouquets, 40, 50 bouquets in a week, you've got to plan for loss, right? And so we typically are planning for anywhere from 30 to 50% loss. And that can either be, we go out in the field and they're just not quite ready. So, they're 2 or 3 days before prime, or they're just past prime. That could be the pest, whether that's disease, bugs, can be wind. They just get beat up, in the wind, those types of things. So having enough flowers is difficult. And then I think another part of that is, what do you want to do with these flowers? There's a difference between having a hobby that makes you a little bit of money, and having a business. And so a hobby that makes you a little bit of money, you can probably do a lot of what you're continuing to do now, just maybe at a little bit larger scale. I think, customer expectation is very small or very low when you're just selling maybe out of your front yard, or you've got a few customers that just kind of know, and you can kind of manage and keep that up. When you've got a business and you're worried about bugs crawling out of an arrangement that you sold. We were having a problem with snapdragons. We had the worms coming out, and we didn't even know, until all of a sudden we had some in our house, and we're like, oh, there's little poop droppings on our counter. And Jenny's like, where are these coming from? And then she's digging into the snapdragons, finding that. I mean, that can sink a business, right? You're worried about a Google review and somebody's like, oh, I bought flowers from them. It's horrible. I had bugs all over. So you have different pressures when you're looking to do this in a true commercial environment. So I think quality, is obviously a big issue, like you noticed. Even just one or two little snips of end of a petal, and people are like, well, that's not great. I mean, they're used to going to a florist or a Hy-Vee, and they're seeing things that are grown in a greenhouse or grown in a big commercial environment where they're spraying for stuff. They've got vacuums that are just pulling everything out of the air. When you're doing field cut grown flowers, you can't control that. I mean, it gets very difficult to get out there and find a flower that has zero defects in it.
Yeah. You mentioned the wind and getting beat up, which made me think about trellising, which is something that I totally neglected to say. I know a lot of people who are using Hortanova plastic mesh netting that is arranged horizontally with like holes through it like that they go up and keeps them more or less straight up so they don't fall over and get kinked. Are you using Hortanova, and is there any other trellising that you are using, and any thoughts about those things?
Yeah, Jenny uses Hortanova quite a bit. Certainly, there are some things that need it. Others, we've made some mistakes and grown things in it, and then it's like a nightmare to try and cut it down later. So you just have to do a little bit of trial and error. But yeah, certainly, especially in central Iowa where we're at, I mean, the winds are just nonstop. I mean, it's, if we get a 15-mile-an-hour wind day, we're thinking, hey, it's not too bad out here.
Yeah, I visited Miss Effie's Flowers over in the Quad Cities, near the Quad Cities, Kathy LaFriend's, and she is using cattle panels that have been bent, and so they're they're and so one of the issues with Horta Nova is it gets all tangled up, or you cut it and then you've got the hole's too big and then they flop anyway. So she's using the cattle panels, and those are, not, you can't cut those, and they're reusable and they work pretty well for her. She's got mostly U-pick there, but I guess it makes sense there, right? That you don't want to. There's more propensity for the cuts to happen in the Horta Nova if it's a U-pick than it's just yourself.
Yep.
Um, what do you do for irrigation?
So this last year, the first year we were out here, we didn't even have water. So I had a 275-gallon IBC tote with a big cage around it that I had on a trailer with a gas-powered pump, and I would take about an hour to fill that up and about 15 minutes to do overhead watering to empty it. Luckily, we finally got water as we were starting the building process and got tapped in. So this last year, I put in underground irrigation so we've got about 26 beds that we use for like the actual beds, so they're 4 feet wide, 70 feet long. So I put in irrigation to the head of each bed. And then we've got drip irrigation that we can add and remove. So it could either be like 2 row or 3 row, depending on spacing within the bed. We still do a little bit of overhead watering, just kind of depends on, where we're at, what's going on. We're experimenting or thinking about experimenting with being able to do some fertilization, with an injector through our drip irrigation, but we haven't got there yet.
Nice. Is there a flower that you love growing or a variety that you love growing that I neglected to mention?
Um, what? Uh, I Lysianthus. He said Lysianthus. Yeah. Jenny
I,
loves Lysianthus and
yeah.
ranunculus.
Oh, yeah. Those are great. Yeah. Are
Yeah.
you growing ranunculus in a tunnel then?
No, she just starts it indoors and then transplants it out
Oh,
and
yes.
gets it out early and then she kind of covers it a little bit then and goes, but she's kind of experimenting with a couple of different things there. One thing we did, one of the questions was, what's a flower that the bees like?
Mm.
We plant anise hyssop. Which, if you're not familiar with that, the version we grow is either a purple or a white flower. But if you know anise, it tastes like black licorice. Well, it actually smells like that as well. And so we've grown that. Jenny grows certain flowers. She'll do like dill and anise hyssop and some lemon basil because so many of these cut flowers don't really have a smell to them. And so to add a little something to her bouquets, she'll stick some of those things in there so it gives it some fragrance, and people are like, "Oh, this is really nice." And the bees love the anise hyssop.
Yeah, they
So.
do. Yeah. Um, uh, Last question I'll ask, then let's go to the general questions. And that is, you had talked about harvesting sunflowers when they were just open, and I think that that's something that maybe people who are getting into cut flowers may not fully understand, that the harvest stage for a lot of these flowers is actually before they are looking like they're in their prime, so you get the longest vase life. And so if you see a flower field that's blooming full of color, that's mostly all past. Can you anything that you more about that?
Oh yeah. So I'm constantly Jenny's the expert in the actual flowers. I'm the hired hand, do some of the business side of things, but I still love them. But I'm usually when I'm out harvesting, I'm like, okay, is this a fully open or fully closed, right? Because some of them you got to wait. I mean, if you cut them too soon, they won't open. Others, if you cut them not soon enough, then they don't give you that full bloom. But like I was just updating the frequently asked questions on our website. I'm redoing our website, and I was updating that. And so the sunflowers are heliotropic, so they will follow the sun. And if you watch them, the head will stay. If it's open, it'll stay facing east in the afternoon. And that sunflower, that's done, man. If you cut that, you might get 2 or 3 days out of it, and that's it. But yeah, if you cut them, especially sunflowers, if you cut them like this within 24 hours, 48 hours, they'll be fully open. They'll last you 7 to 10 days, like that. So but every flower is different. So
Yeah. I know people who are have a lot of peonies, and those you harvest in like this marshmallow stage where it's just started to open, and you touch it and it feels like puffy, kind of like a marshmallow. And if you harvest them kind of like that and hold them cool, you can get peonies held in a cooler for a long, long time, and then take them out, warm them, and then they'll fully open.
Yeah, Jenny tried some of hers. So she harvested hers and then wrapped them and put them in a cooler. And then she took them out in July.
Yeah.
They're quite as nice as if you get them, fresh, but I'm guessing most people would be like, I'll take, peonies in July if I can get them.
Speaking of good smelling flowers, my goodness. Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Alicia, would you be willing to toss some questions to us?
Yeah, definitely. Well, Dave already got to the one that I wanted. I didn't know, Dan, if you wanted to add anything to that. We have a lot of master gardeners that are very conservation minded, very interested in caring for the bumblebees. So, are there any other flowers that you would add to the list of, ones that you like to grow that also are very well appreciated by the bumblebees?
Hmm. No, that's a great question. When I don't necessarily see just bees and bumblebees on my flowers. I see such diversity of wasps, and like the celosia, for instance, attracts those black ones with like iridescent wings. Those ones seem to be so attracted to celosia. And those are natives also, those insects, and those have a place also. And I've found by having a large part of my garden, I'm still mostly a vegetable grower, but like say a quarter of my garden is cut flowers, I end up having way fewer caterpillar pests on like my kale because some of the wasps that are coming and pollinating these flowers or feeding on these flowers are taking the caterpillars and feeding their young. They'll lay eggs in those caterpillars, or there's so much predation that happens from the flowers being there on my pests that are in my other things. This is not to say that I have no pests. I still have tons of pests.
Questions, if you have any
But
answers to give.
oh, so anyway, that I don't know necessarily. I would agree that the bees love the Anacicup and that
Okay,
mint family in general. Yeah.
okay, great. And then was there an aha moment or a moment of wisdom from the 2025 growing season that either of you would like to share? It's a very deep philosophical question.
Oh, every year there's about 12
Yeah.
aha moments.
Yeah.
um,
Yeah. Like every year I was mentioning the podcast that I do, Pivot Points, about transitions, big transitions in farming. And some farmer told me every year's a transition year. Every year's so different that you just got to treat it like it's its own thing and learn the lessons and make some new mistakes because it's going to be different. And so, yeah, with the wet that we had, it seemed like that delayed some blooms and damaged others. There was also some growth that was stunted because nitrogen had been leached away. But from the anything from you, Dave?
no, for us, like you said, it's constantly the weather's so different every year, and the blooms respond differently. One of the things we had, June was so wet that our decorative pumpkins just took a beating. We
Hmm.
hardly got any blooms that survived. So,
Yeah,
we had 50 or so plants, and I bet we got 50 pumpkins. I
yeah,
mean, it was bad.
yeah. Yeah, it was not a good pumpkin year for some. Some people said it was a really good one, but most of the people I talked to had a bad year. I would say one thing that I learned was in my low. So I use like EMT conduit, plastic tunnels. I protect some flowers over the winter. And what I found was there was some bachelor's buttons that had volunteered and were outside that tunnel, and I had some in the tunnel that was also protected. And the ones that were, and then I also planted some in the spring. And so the ones that were in the tunnel bloomed about 5 weeks prior to the ones that I planted in the spring. The ones that were out of the tunnel and just volunteered in their own, bed. They bloomed a couple of weeks prior to the spring planted ones. So just that you can have sort of a succession planting, but not that you need a succession planting with bachelor's buttons, but that's another way to maybe think about these overwintered ones and maybe getting a succession planting.
Yeah, one thing we did discover with our succession planting on our sunflowers is the ones we planted in early May, for the next 3 weeks, pretty much everything caught up to it. So even trying to get it out in early May and then middle of May, the ones we planted late May, everything kind of caught up by the end of June, early July. So we
Hmm.
basically had three successions that were all coming at the same time. And
Hmm.
it's you got to look at the soil temp, you got to watch the weather, really closely. And if it looks like it's not going to get warm, just don't plant.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, great reminders. So I don't know that either of you do this, but this is a topic that's becoming more and more popular. We see it a lot on social media. Someone was asking from our Facebook audience about thoughts on winter sowing for things like snapdragons, zinnias, celosia. What are your thoughts on that? And I guess I should describe, if someone is not aware, what winter sowing is. Normally, it's where people are using milk jugs or similar, apparatuses. I don't know if that's the correct plural term of apparatus, but usually it's a milk jug. You cut the top off, or you make the top so that you can fold it open and fold it closed. And you would open it, you put some soil in there, you plant your seeds, you close it back up, and you just have the milk spout part that's venting so that they don't get overheated. And we're seeing on social media, on like the Master Gardener channels and places like that, a lot of discussion around winter sowing. So, any thoughts on that for those ornamentals? And they had listed those specific three, the snapdragons, zinnias, and celosia.
Well, I
Yeah.
don't. Go ahead, Dave.
No, you go ahead.
What I was going to say is, it sounds a lot like what I've seen some gardeners doing, rather than actually though filling the milk jug with soil and slicing and like having a cap, they'll just plant in the ground and cut the bottom off the milk jug and put that milk jug over that plant that's in the soil or in the raised bed, and then that and have the cap be there for the cold nights, and then the cap off for when it needs to let some of that heat out. So would you say that's the same sort of a general idea,
Yeah,
or
you
is it totally different?
No, you can also do it that way. I guess
Okay,
I think of the ones that you kind of cut and they open and close because I'm a home person, home
sure.
grower that does
Container
not have any
planting. Yeah.
in-ground space. So that's the one
Yep.
that always comes to mind for me. But you're
Yep.
definitely right. People do it
Okay.
that way where they put them in the ground
Yep.
and cover it. So it's more like a cloche or a
Yeah,
mini greenhouse.
exactly. I was going to say it's like a cloche. It's like this French intensive thing where they had glass cloches, and this is legit, and it's a way of doing it, and it's essentially like sort of a smaller scale of what I'm trying to do with my low tunnels. Like there's so many ways you can cover plants to get them in their ground earlier and get earlier blooms, and I would encourage everybody to play around with it and have fun with that and see what you can do, because yeah, there's a lot of ways you can get earlier stuff.
So Jenny's actually doing a session at the Polk County Master Gardeners Dig Symposium, not this Saturday, but next Saturday, about like growing the cold hardy annuals and kind of extending your season, that shoulder season on both front and the back. And she's doing that. I mean, she's using the milk jugs. She gets those out there. She loves it because they just kind of grow. They're already hardened off. She doesn't have to do anything with them. They're already used to being outside, seeing the sunlight. And so she loves it. She thinks it's a great idea.
Great. Let's do two last questions real quick. Then I'm going to do my closing slides and get everyone the information that we need. Um, Flowers that last the longest in the vase after being cut, in your
Hmm.
experience.
Lysianthus has such a long vase life. It's so good. Lysianthus is just so good. It looks like a rose. It's not a rose. And it's just such a long vase life.
Rudbeckia will
Yeah.
last quite a while. if you cut it at the right time. And then sunflowers, like I said, you can get 7 to 10 days out of those. So
So
Yeah.
Dan does have his resources or some sources up on the screen, and I love down at the bottom. Iowa State Extension and Outreach does not specifically endorse any companies, so we do just have to remind you all of that. That's not our goal here. We provide information and you get to make your own decisions about what is right for you. But Dan has graciously shared some of his sources.